When Legends Fall 21, black bands of the 70s with heartbreaking endings. They made the world dance, love, and believe, yet behind the fame, 21 black music groups of the 1970s faced untold heartbreak. Plane crashes, stage collapses, car wrecks, and stolen dreams, stories buried beneath platinum records and forgotten headlines. What really happened to the legends who built the sound of soul and funk? Why did so many of their brightest stars fall in silence? Tonight we uncover the truth behind the music history tried to hide. Subscribe, hit the bell, and stay till the end because some fates are too powerful to be forgotten. The Bar-Kays. In the late 1960s, as soul and funk began shaping America's cultural heartbeat, a group of young men from Memphis, the Bar-Kays, stood at the edge of stardom. They weren't just another rhythm section. Their raw energy, brass-driven grooves, and signature instrumental hit Soul Finger made them the sound of youth, optimism, and change. Within months of their breakout, the band achieved what most only dreamed of performing as the backing group for Otis Redding, the crown jewel of soul. Their chemistry was electric, their future limitless, and every concert echoed with the pulse of a new generation finding its voice through rhythm. But on December 10, 1967, destiny turned merciless. As the Beechcraft H-18 carrying Otis Redding and members of the Bar-Kays approached Madison, Wisconsin, the aircraft plunged into the freezing waters of Lake Monona just 3 miles from the runway. The crash claimed Otis Redding and 4 of the band's 6 touring members, including Jimmy King, Ronnie Caldwell, Phelan Jones, and Carl Cunningham. Only trumpeter Ben Cauley survived, thrown clear of the wreckage because he hadn't fastened his seatbelt. Floating alone in icy silence, clinging to a seat cushion, Cauley would later recall the image of Otis turning toward him moments before. Impact, a wordless farewell suspended in time. At the Madison airport, bassist James Alexander, the sole member not on the plane, waited to collect the others. He saw smoke rising over the lake and knew without being told that his brothers were gone. The tragedy came just 3 days after Redding had finished recording Sittin' on the Dock of the Bay, a song that eerily became both his and the band's final chapter, a soulful goodbye released posthumously. The wreckage of that flight didn't just bury lives, it buried a movement that had barely begun. In the years that followed, Alexander rebuilt the Bar-Kays with new members carrying forward the spirit of those lost. But on every stage, one spot remained intentionally empty, a silent tribute to friends who never returned. Their story endures as a haunting reminder that even at the height of creation, fate can silence a sound destined to change the world. Heatwave. In the golden glow of the late 1970s, few bands captured the heart of dance floors like Heatwave. With timeless hits such as Boogie Nights, Always and Forever, and The Groove Line, the group bridged the gap between funk, soul, and disco, uniting people across cultures and continents. Founded by brothers Johnny and Keith Wilder, both U.S. Air Force veterans, Heatwave wasn't just about rhythm. It was about joy, precision, and a sense of freedom that pulsed through every beat. Their sound was smooth yet defiant, vibrant yet soulful, a reflection of black artistry at its peak in a decade bursting with creative rebellion. But success can be fleeting, and for Heatwave, tragedy struck when the music was loudest. In February 1979, while driving through Dayton, Ohio, lead vocalist Johnny Wilder Jr. was involved in a devastating car accident. A delivery truck ran a red light and crashed into his vehicle at nearly 55 miles per hour, leaving him completely paralyzed from the neck down. Doctors delivered this cruel verdict: he would never walk or sing again. For most, that would have been the end of the story. For Johnny, it became the beginning of a different kind of music, one written not with hands or movement, but with breath and faith. Against all odds, Wilder refused to let silence define him. Using a special device, he began composing by tapping notes with his chin and recording vocals through faint, measured breaths. His resilience inspired both his bandmates and countless fans who saw in him the pure essence of soul strength through pain, melody, through limitation. While Heatwave continued performing under his brother's leadership, Johnny remained their spiritual core, guiding the group's sound even from his wheelchair. His voice, though stilled, seemed to echo in every lyric, a whisper reminding the world that music could survive, even when the body could not. Johnny Wilder Jr. passed away in May 2006 at the age of 56, leaving behind 2 unfinished songs he never had the chance to record. Yet his legacy burns quietly like embers after a fire, steady, glowing, and eternal. In the story of 1970s black music, Heatwave stands not just as a band of rhythm and groove, but as a symbol of unbreakable spirit, proof that even when tragedy strikes, the music never truly dies. The Sequence. Long before hip-hop became a global movement, 3 young women from Columbia, South Carolina, Angie Stone, Cheryl the Pearl Cook, and Gwendolyn Blondie Chisholm, dared to step into a world that didn't yet have space for them. They called themselves The Sequence, and in 1979 their infectious single Funk You Up made history as the first commercially successful rap song by an all-female group. Signed to Sugar Hill Records, they rapped with confidence, humor, and unapologetic black femininity, opening the door for every woman in hip-hop who came after. At a time when the industry was dominated by male voices, The Sequence didn't just perform, they claimed their place in the story of music. Through the early 1980s, their vibrant energy lit up stages from Atlanta to New York. Their performances blended funk bass lines with rhythmic rhymes that celebrated love, community, and power. Yet behind their success, the group battled industry neglect and limited opportunities that too often shadowed black female artists. While male rap pioneers found long-term recognition, The Sequence's contributions were overlooked, their names quietly fading into the footnotes of history, until Angie Stone re-emerged as a solo soul powerhouse in the 1990s, reminding the world where it all began. Then, in a heartbreaking twist of fate, tragedy struck in March 2025. After performing at a tribute event for pioneering women in Atlanta, Angie Stone, then 63 years old, was involved in a fatal car accident at the intersection of Cascade Road and Benjamin E. Mays Drive. An SUV ran a red light, colliding with her vehicle and causing catastrophic injuries. Despite emergency surgery, Angie passed away at 3:42 a.m., leaving behind a legacy carved in rhythm and resilience. The news sent shockwaves through the hip-hop community. The remaining members, Cheryl and Blondie, stood at her funeral, placing a vinyl copy of Funk You Up atop her casket, the same song that had given them immortality decades earlier. The Sequence's story is both triumphant and tragic. The rise of 3 women who built the bridge between soul and rap, only for time and fate to silence their harmony. But their echo remains pulsing through every beat of modern hip-hop. Because before there was Ladies First, there was The Sequence. The women who rapped first lived fiercely and left too soon. Fats Domino Band. In the story of early rock and roll, few names shine brighter than Fats Domino, the humble genius from New Orleans who bridged rhythm and blues into the sound of a generation. Behind him, the Fats Domino Band carried the heartbeat of songs like Blueberry Hill, Ain't That a Shame, and I'm Walkin'. Their performances were joyous, their chemistry effortless, a perfect blend of brass swing and the unmistakable warmth of New Orleans soul. For 2 decades, they traveled together through smoky clubs, segregated theaters, and massive stages, bringing the joy of black music to audiences that once refused to see its brilliance. But on the night of September 18, 1970, the harmony was shattered. After a show in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 6 members of the touring band climbed into a van bound for Slidell, just 80 miles away. The rain was relentless, the roads slick with oil and shadows. On a sharp curve along Highway 190, a truck suddenly swerved across the center line. The collision was instantaneous, a violent crash that crumpled steel and silenced laughter. Clarence "Sonny" Fields, the band's veteran saxophonist, was killed instantly, his instrument still resting against his chest. 3 others were seriously injured. The night's echo, the brass, the rhythm, the joy ended in a single hollow note. Fats Domino had taken a separate car that night, staying behind for a radio interview. When news reached him, witnesses said he sat in stunned silence, his hands trembling. For hours he couldn't speak. When he finally did, all he could say was, "Sonny was my sound." The loss broke something within him. Though the band continued performing in the years that followed, the stage never looked the same. On the right side, where Sonny used to stand, Domino insisted the space remain empty, a living memorial to the man whose horn once lifted entire rooms to their feet. For the Fats Domino Band, that rainy Louisiana night was more than an accident. It was the moment when an era ended. The laughter, the long drives, the easy rhythm of brotherhood all turned into memory. Yet in every replay of Blueberry Hill beneath the rolling piano and the velvet voice, you can still hear the ghost of a saxophone softly playing from a road that never ends. KC and the Sunshine Band, Unshine. Few sounds captured the pulse of the 1970s like KC and the Sunshine Band. With hits such as That's the Way I Like It, Get Down Tonight, and Shake Your Booty. They didn't just make people dance, they built the soundtrack of joy for a decade. Led by Harry Wayne. KCKC, the group's mix of funk, R&B, and disco, was irresistible, turning them into one of the few interracial bands to dominate both black and white radio stations. Behind the lights and the sequins was a tight ensemble of gifted musicians, including Jerome Smith, the guitarist whose sharp riffs gave their songs an unmistakable edge. By the late 1990s, however, the glamour of disco had long faded, and many of the musicians who once filled arenas were left to struggle quietly. For Jerome Smith, that decline was brutal. After creative disputes and disagreements over royalties, he departed the group he had helped define. Despite contributing to records that sold millions worldwide, Jerome reportedly received little compensation from reissues and licensing. Without recognition or support, the once celebrated guitarist was forced into manual labor to survive. On July 28, 2000, tragedy struck. While working at a construction site in West Palm Beach, Florida, Jerome was operating a bulldozer when he fell from the cabin and was crushed beneath its heavy wheels. He died instantly at the age of 47. News of his death barely reached headlines, a cruel contrast to the years when his guitar made the world dance. When his body was identified, his listed occupation read simply, laborer. The man whose hands had shaped the rhythm of a generation was gone uncelebrated and unprotected by the very industry his music had enriched. When KC learned of Jerome's passing, he was devastated. The band canceled shows for nearly 2 years, and when they finally returned to the stage, Jerome's recorded guitar solos were played live. No one dared to replace them. The loss was more than personal. It was symbolic of an era's cost. KC and the Sunshine Band continued, but something essential. The heartbeat, the groove that once made the world move, was gone. Jerome Smith's story stands as a sobering reminder that behind the glitter of the 1970s funk revolution lay the quiet tragedy of artists who gave everything to the music and received nothing in return. The Temptations. No group embodied the soul of Motown quite like the Temptations. With their immaculate suits, razor-sharp choreography, and voices that defined a generation, they gave the world timeless anthems such as My Girl Ain't Too Proud to Beg and Papa Was a Rollin' Stone. Their harmonies weren't just musical, they were architectural, built on discipline, unity, and black excellence at a time when segregation still scarred America's stages. Among them stood Paul Williams, the baritone co-founder, whose calm authority and emotional depth gave the group its steady rhythm and soul. But behind the glitter and applause, Paul carried invisible burdens. Years of relentless touring, health problems, and alcohol dependency began to erode his spirit. Though the Temptations' fame soared through the late 1960s, Paul's struggles grew deeper. By 1971, he was quietly removed from live performances due to exhaustion and worsening illness replaced on stage, even as his voice continued to grace their recordings. The man who had once choreographed the group's iconic moves now stood in the shadows of the empire he helped build. On August 17, 1973, tragedy struck. Paul Williams was found dead in his car in an alley in Detroit, Michigan. He had a single gunshot wound to the head, a half-empty bottle of liquor by his side, and a pistol nearby. The police ruled his death a suicide, but questions lingered. There were no fingerprints on the gun, no suicide note, and no clear explanation for how the scene unfolded. Some believed he was overwhelmed by debt and illness. Others whispered of foul play. What remained certain was that one of Motown's greatest hearts had stopped beating alone far from the spotlight he helped create. After his death, the Temptations carried on, but the golden harmony was gone. For fans, Paul Williams wasn't just another singer, he was the quiet soul who held the group together. His passing marked the end of Motown's most luminous era, a reminder that even within the elegance of success, pain can echo louder than applause. To this day, in every performance of My Girl, his spirit lingers, the unseen rhythm of a man whose voice and grace helped define the very sound of American soul. The Dramatics. In the golden age of soul, the Dramatics were masters of emotion, weaving heartbreak and hope into harmonies that could lift a crowd to tears. Formed in Detroit, their sound blended the grit of the streets with the velvet of Motown's polish. Songs like In the Rain, What You See Is What You Get, and Hey You Get Off My Mountain didn't just top charts, they defined the essence of 1970s R&B, rich, layered, and drenched in feeling. Their stage performances were magnetic, their voices intertwined like gospel prayers, and for a moment it seemed nothing could interrupt their rise. That illusion shattered on a stormy July night in 1975. The group's tour bus, carrying members and crew from Indianapolis to Chicago, met disaster on a rain-slicked highway. The driver, newly hired and unfamiliar with the terrain, lost control as the vehicle skidded on an oil patch. The massive coach veered sideways, slid down an embankment, and crashed into a concrete pillar. Inside, chaos erupted, shattering glass. Falling equipment screams drowned by the sound of twisted metal. L.J. Reynolds, the group's soulful tenor, suffered chest injuries that left him unable to reach his trademark high notes for nearly 2 years. Willie Ford, the deep bass anchoring their harmonies, broke his hip and was confined to a wheelchair for months. Their manager remained in a coma, fighting for his life. No one died that night, but something in the group's spirit did. Just hours before the crash, the Dramatics had signed a $100,000 performance contract with the legendary Isaac Hayes, their biggest deal to date, a symbol of their hard-earned success. After the accident, the tour was canceled, the album release postponed indefinitely, and media coverage nearly non-existent. In an era when black artists often struggled for fair attention, their tragedy went unnoticed beyond their loyal fans. It would take nearly 3 years for the Dramatics to return to the stage, but their voices carried a weight that hadn't been there before. The pain of that night lived in every lyric, proof that survival too has a sound. Their harmonies remained beautiful, but behind them was something even more powerful, the echo of resilience. Because while fame can fade, the courage to sing again after nearly losing everything never does. The Dells. Before Motown ruled the airwaves, there were the Dells, 6 young men from Harvey, Illinois, whose harmonies could make time stand still. Formed in the 1950s, their careers stretched across 4 decades, bridging doo-wop, soul, and R&B. With heartfelt ballads like Stay in My Corner and Oh, What a Night They Were, more than singers. They were storytellers of love and loss, of struggle and perseverance in a country still learning to hear black voices. By the early 1970s, the Dells had matured into elder statesmen of soul, their concerts drawing multi-generational crowds who saw in them a rare consistency, loyalty, brotherhood, and truth through harmony. Then, on a cold, rainy night in March 1970, tragedy nearly ended it all. Traveling from Milwaukee after a show, the group's tour bus struck an icy barrier on Interstate 94, flipped and skidded into a ditch. The crash was brutal. Equipment smashed through seats, and the driver was killed instantly. 3 members were critically injured, including Michael McGill, the group's deep, resonant bass voice. When rescuers arrived nearly 40 minutes later, delayed because the accident occurred in a neglected, predominantly black area, McGill was found motionless with no pulse. Declared dead by an intern physician, he was zipped into a body bag and sent to the morgue. But 5 hours later, in a moment that defied comprehension, a nurse opening the bag for dental record checks heard a faint gasp. McGill was alive. He had survived hypothermia shock and misdiagnosis. For 3 weeks, he suffered memory loss, unable to recall who he was or the music that had defined his life. When he finally recovered, he rejoined the Dells not out of ambition but gratitude. They called it the miracle on the road, though none of them ever spoke of it publicly again. After the crash, the Dells canceled all touring for 5 years and vowed never to travel without trusted drivers. Each member carried a quiet scar from that night, a reminder that fame could vanish as quickly as breath in cold air. Yet when they eventually returned to the stage, their harmonies carried new weight. Every note of "Oh, What a Night" became a prayer not for love, but for life itself. For the Dells, survival wasn't luck. It was resistance. A declaration that black music and black lives could not be written off so easily, not even by death itself. The O'Jays. In the early 1970s, few groups embodied the spirit of black pride and unity like the O'Jays. Rising from Canton, Ohio, the trio Eddie Levert, Walter Williams, and William Powell transformed the sound of soul into a movement. Their hits Backstabbers and Love Train became more than chart toppers. They were anthems of resilience and collective hope. Produced under the mighty Philadelphia International Records, the O'Jays weren't just entertainers, they were messengers. Their harmonies carried a message that love, loyalty, and brotherhood could transcend pain. But behind the shimmering suits and synchronized steps, fate was preparing a cruel test of that brotherhood. On September 14, 1973, after a performance in Cleveland, the trio set out by car toward Philadelphia, driving themselves as they often preferred, no entourage. No driver, just music and laughter. As rain slicked the asphalt of Interstate 76, the car lost traction on a downhill curve. It spun sideways, flipped, and skidded nearly 80 meters before coming to rest crushed against the guardrail. Walter Williams was knocked unconscious. William Powell was pinned between seats and badly injured, and Eddie Levert, who had taken the wheel for fun, crawled out unscathed. But the joy of survival carried a shadow guilt. In the aftermath, the record label reportedly instructed police to record an unnamed technician as the driver to protect the group's public image, then newly tied to a lucrative $500,000 CBS contract. Though all 3 men lived, the accident left lasting scars. Powell's voice, once pure and soaring, weakened over time, the trauma lingering in his chest and memory. He struggled through shows, sometimes forgetting lyrics, or staying behind stage curtains to sing backup instead of lead. Meanwhile, Eddie, haunted by the crash, never again sat behind a steering wheel. For him, every road carried ghosts. In 1977, tragedy returned. William Powell died of cancer at just 35 years old, cutting short one of the most expressive voices in soul music. That night, the O'Jays still performed in Baltimore, honoring their fallen brother, the only way they knew how, through song. Before stepping on stage, Eddie Levert looked into the dressing room mirror, punched it, and shattered it into pieces. The broken glass reflected what fame could never mend, a friendship cracked by fate, a sound forever touched by loss. The Spinners. In the pantheon of 1970s soul, the Spinners shone like polished brass. Their harmonies were silk over steel, disciplined, elegant, yet overflowing with emotion. Originating in Detroit, the group carved their legacy with songs like "I'll Be Around," "Could It Be," "I'm Falling in Love," and "Then Came You." Under the smooth production of Tom Bell, they became architects of the Philadelphia soul sound, balancing heartache and sophistication in every note. They weren't just performers, they were craftsmen of feeling. But on one fateful night in 1974, during a concert that should have celebrated their success, tragedy struck, not in music, but in silence. The venue was the Spectrum Theater in Philadelphia, packed with thousands of fans swaying to the rhythm of one-of-a-kind love affair. As the lights flared and applause roared, lead singer Bobby Smith, dressed in a pristine white suit, stepped backward during a choreographed move. None of the crew knew that part of the rear stage platform had been removed earlier for lighting adjustments. In an instant, Bobby disappeared from view, plunging 9 feet into an open pit below the stage. For a few seconds, the music continued as the crowd, unaware, kept dancing. Then came screams, a sudden stop, and the heavy silence that follows catastrophe. Bobby was rushed to the hospital with severe spinal injuries and nerve damage that left his right leg partially numb. Though he eventually recovered enough to walk, he never fully regained his range or stage confidence. His fall forced the Spinners to cancel 17 tour dates, costing nearly $200,000, a devastating financial and emotional blow at the peak of their fame. Adding insult to injury, the event organizers refused to pay his medical bills, citing a liability loophole that excluded performer accidents. Despite the pain, the Spinners continued to sing, adapting choreography and lighting to accommodate Bobby's slower movements. In every performance thereafter, when the spotlight dimmed for their closing bow, the group would always glance behind them, a small, instinctive check born from that night's horror. For fans, the Spinners remained a symbol of class and endurance. For the band, the stage itself became a reminder that even amid success, danger can wait just beyond the edge of the light. The Chi-Lites, emerging from the heart of Chicago's South Side. The Chi-Lites embodied the emotional elegance of 1970s soul. Led by Eugene Record and Marshall Thompson, their songs "Have You Seen Her, Oh Girl" and "A Letter to Myself" captured the everyday poetry of love and heartbreak in Black America. Their harmonies glided between tenderness and ache, making them one of the defining groups of the decade. But as the applause grew louder, fate was quietly composing its own verse of loss. In November 1976, while traveling from Chicago to Cleveland for a performance, the group rented a small van, a budget decision driven by tight tour finances and record label neglect. The weather turned against them on Interstate 71, cold rain, black ice, and wind cutting across the Ohio plains. The van, missing proper plates and lacking insurance documentation, skidded violently, flipped twice, and landed in a shallow ditch. Amid shattered glass and bent metal, Marshall Thompson, the group's drummer and co-founder, was thrown forward through the windshield. A shard of glass slashed across his right eye, permanently reducing his vision by nearly 40%. The accident forced the Chi-Lites to cancel 12 shows, costing tens of thousands of dollars they could not afford to lose. To make matters worse, insurance refused to pay the medical bills due to missing rental paperwork. The injury marked Thompson forever. The dark sunglasses he wore on stage afterward weren't for style, but necessity. Behind those lenses was a man who could no longer fully see the audience he was singing to, even as they wept to the question, "Have you seen her?" Though the group continued performing and recording into the 1980s, their momentum never fully recovered. The accident became an unspoken wound, a reminder that even at the height of fame, one wrong turn could steal the light from a soul meant to shine. The Chi-Lites' story endures as a symbol of perseverance through pain. Every harmony, every slow groove that followed carried not just nostalgia, but a quiet triumph. Proof that even when vision is taken, the music and the message of love never fades. Earth, Wind & Fire. Few bands have ever embodied joy, creativity, and cosmic spirituality like Earth, Wind & Fire. Founded by Maurice White in 1969, the group redefined funk and soul, turning music into a force of elevation. With hits like September Shining Star Fantasy and Reasons, they merged African rhythms, jazz sophistication, and gospel warmth into an unmistakable sound that celebrated Black excellence and unity. Their concerts were legendary, a mix of pyrotechnics, soaring falsettos, and choreography that felt closer to ritual than performance. For many fans, Earth, Wind & Fire weren't just a band. They were a revelation. But at the height of their success in June 1975, That revelation nearly ended in disaster. During a concert in Denver, Colorado, the band prepared to perform Shining Star, their freshly minted Grammy-winning anthem. Just as vocalist Philip Bailey lifted the microphone for his opening line, an 18-kilowatt stage light, one of the massive fixtures used for their elaborate setup, broke loose from its rigging above. It fell directly onto his left shoulder, crushing muscle and bone and knocking him to the floor in front of thousands. The audience gasped, thinking it part of the show, until the music stopped and bandmates rushed to his side. Bailey was rushed to the hospital with a deep wound and torn ligaments. Surgery saved his arm, but the injury left him unable to raise it fully ever again. For months, he retrained himself to sing through pain using altered mic stands and posture to accommodate the damage. The gold microphone he held that night, still stained with his blood, was never cleaned or used again. Maurice White kept it locked in the band's Los Angeles studio as a reminder that brilliance always walks a thin line between triumph and tragedy. The accident changed how Earth, Wind & Fire performed forever. They began employing dedicated safety engineers and inspecting every venue personally before soundcheck, a practice that later became industry standard. Yet through it all, their music remained radiant. Bailey's voice, slightly altered by the trauma, carried even greater emotion. When he sang Shining Star for you to see what your life can truly be, it no longer sounded like celebration, it sounded like survival. The Isley Brothers. From gospel roots in Cincinnati to funk royalty on the world stage, the Isley Brothers carved one of the longest, most influential legacies in black music. Their versatility was unmatched. They could glide through tender ballads like For the Love of You, ignite dance floors with It's Your Thing, and thunder through rock-infused hits like That Lady. By the late 1970s, they had become a symbol of evolution itself, a band that transcended genres, generations, and even time. Yet beneath the fame, endless touring had become their quiet enemy. The road that carried them to glory was also the one that would almost take them away. In May 1979, while driving through the mountain passes of Tennessee, the Isley Brothers' touring RV swerved violently to avoid a deer crossing the road. The vehicle rolled 3 times down a steep incline before crashing to a halt against a rocky embankment. Inside were 6 members, including brothers Ronald O'Kelly and Marvin Isley. The crash tore through the vehicle like a wave of metal and glass. Marvin, the youngest, suffered a fractured vertebra and nerve damage that left him bedridden for weeks. Doctors warned that one wrong movement could leave him permanently paralyzed. As Marvin lay in the hospital, his brother Ronald Isley sat beside him night after night, quietly writing what he believed could be his final will, a simple document dividing the band's earnings equally among all members. It wasn't just about money, it was about love, a vow that if one brother fell, the others would carry him forward. Marvin eventually recovered, but he was never the same. He refused to sit by a window in any vehicle again, haunted by the blur of headlights and the feeling of spinning helplessly through darkness. Though the accident never made national headlines, its shadow lingered within the group. The Isleys carried on delivering electrifying performances and new hits, but the road was no longer just a path to the stage, it was a reminder of mortality. Years later, when Marvin's health again declined due to diabetes, Ronald often revisited that night in Tennessee, saying, "That was the first time I realized we weren't invincible." For a band that had lived through every era of soul, that realization marked the beginning of a quieter, more reflective chapter, where every performance felt like both a victory and a prayer. The Commodores. When the 1970s turned the world into a disco-lit stage, the Commodores stood as its heartbeat. Emerging from Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, the group's blend of funk precision and soulful warmth made them unstoppable. With hits like Brick House, Easy 3 Times a Lady, and Sail On, they became one of the few bands that could make people dance, cry, and fall in love all in one album. Their live shows were a spectacle of tight musicianship, humor, and harmony, powered by the charisma of Lionel Richie and the quiet brilliance of Milan Williams, their founding keyboardist and composer of many of the band's grooves. But at the height of their fame, one misstep would leave a scar that time could never erase. It was July 1978 during a tour stop in Texas, just weeks after 3 Times a Lady had reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. The band was performing to a sold-out crowd, their confidence sky high. Between sets, as the stage crew reset the equipment, Milan Williams stepped off stage to retrieve a forgotten cable. What he didn't realize was that part of the platform had been dismantled for maintenance. In a split second, he fell 1.4 meters, nearly 5 feet, onto jagged metal flooring below. The impact shattered his right wrist, tore ligaments, and left his hand bloodied and mangled. The screams backstage drowned out the music as Lionel Richie rushed to his side. Emergency surgery saved Milan's hand, but not his artistry. Despite months of rehabilitation and 54 stitches, he could no longer play with the same precision that defined the Commodore's sound. For a musician, it was the cruelest fate to live surrounded by the music you could no longer make. While the band publicly called it an onstage accident, those close to Milan knew it marked the beginning of his withdrawal. When Richie embarked on his solo career a few years later, Milan quietly followed suit, not into fame, but into silence. In later interviews, he spoke sparingly about the fall, once saying, "They called it an accident, but to me, it was goodbye without a signature." Though the Commodores carried on, they were never quite the same. Every time the keys played those opening chords of Easy, fans heard not just melody, but memory. The echo of a gifted hand that once touched the heart of soul music until fate took it away. The Manhattans. In the smooth, romantic landscape of 1970s soul, the Manhattans were masters of elegance. Formed in Jersey City, New Jersey, their music was slow, fire, passionate, graceful, and hauntingly sincere. With hits like Kiss and Say Goodbye, There's No Me Without You, and Shining Star, they became symbols of devotion and heartache. Dressed in matching suits, they moved like a single soul in 5 voices, each performance a sermon of love. Yet amid their peak, a single night's misfortune would test their harmony not in song, but in silence. It was a warm August evening in 1976 in Cleveland, Ohio, where the group was performing before a sold-out audience. The show had been flawless. Gerald Alston's voice soared, the harmonies glided, and the lights shimmered gold. As the final notes of Shining Star echoed through the hall, a newly installed fog machine began releasing a dense, swirling mist across the stage. No one realized that the fog had spilled too far forward, cloaking the edge of the platform in a white haze. In the dim light, Alston took one confident step toward the crowd and vanished. He had fallen nearly 2 meters 6 feet into the orchestra pit below. The audience gasped, unsure if it was part of the show. But moments later, the music stopped, and chaos filled the room. Alston lay unconscious, blood trickling from his forehead. Rushed to the hospital, he was diagnosed with a mild concussion and spinal strain. Physically, he recovered within months, but the trauma ran deeper. His confidence, once unshakable, wavered. For 8 months, he refused to perform live, haunted by flashbacks of falling into darkness under the bright stage lights. The accident forced the Manhattans to cancel 20 shows, costing the group and their label tens of thousands of dollars. Yet it also changed them. From that moment on, every concert contract they signed included one specific clause: no fog, no haze, only clear light. For a group whose songs had always explored love's beauty and pain, the rule was more than precaution, it was symbolism. Beneath the elegance and poise, they had learned that even golden light can hide danger. Still, when they finally returned to the stage, Alston's voice carried a new depth, a reminder that fragility and strength often sing in the same key. The Stylistics. In the lush garden of 1970s Philadelphia soul, the Stylistics bloomed brighter than almost anyone. Their songs You Make Me Feel Brand New, Betcha, By Golly, Wow and I'm Stone in Love with You became soundtracks to tenderness. Led by the angelic falsetto of Russell Tompkins Jr., they turned vulnerability into poetry. Their harmonies weren't just music, they were emotions sculpted into sound, the voice of Black romance refined through grace and struggle. By the mid-1970s, their fame stretched from the streets of Philly to stages across Europe. But behind the polished suits and flawless vocals, tragedy waited on the open road. In 1977, during a grueling interstate tour across the American South, the group's van set out on a rain-soaked highway after a show in Louisiana. The night was slick and dark thunder rolling low in the distance. As they approached a curve, the driver lost control on the wet asphalt. The van spun out, slammed into a guardrail, and shuddered to a stop. Equipment scattered, glass shattered, and the smell of burning oil filled the air. One member suffered a cracked pelvis. Others were trapped for over half an hour before help arrived. No one died, but the accident struck deep. It wasn't just the physical injuries that scarred the Stylistics. Their carefully tailored performance suits, newly purchased after years of financial hardship, caught fire from a fallen amplifier and were destroyed. To outsiders, it was a small loss. To the band, it symbolized something larger. Every step forward seemed shadowed by misfortune. They canceled the rest of the tour, and their record label, unwilling to wait, slashed promotional budgets. The group's visibility dimmed almost overnight, a cruel turn for artists who had given the decade some of its gentlest, most enduring love songs. After the crash, the Stylistics quietly withdrew from the U.S. market, finding steadier appreciation in the U.K., where their softer sound continued to resonate. Yet they rarely spoke of that night on the highway, the one that nearly silenced their harmonies forever. When Russell Tompkins Jr. sang, "You Make Me Feel Brand New," the line carried a different weight: gratitude for survival, grief for innocence lost. Their music still floats through the decades, smooth and beautiful. But if you listen closely beneath the romance, you can still hear the rain. The Delfonics. In the late 1960s and early 70s, the Delfonics were the heartbeat of Philadelphia soul, smooth, romantic, and unshakably cool. With hits like "Didn't I Blow Your Mind This Time," "La La Means I Love You," and "Ready or Not Here I Come," they perfected the art of tender precision. Their harmonies were pure silk. Their lyrics, love letters to a generation learning how to feel deeply through music. Led by William "Poogie" Hart, his brother Wilbert Hart, and Randy Kane, the trio carried themselves like gentlemen in an era when elegance was rebellion. Yet even grace couldn't protect them from the danger that came with fame, the road, the flashing lights, and the chaos that trailed success. In September 1977, following a triumphant concert at the Spectrum Arena in Philadelphia, the Delfonics van left the venue late at night, heading across the Benjamin Franklin Bridge toward New Jersey. Drizzle slicked the highway as the glow of the city faded behind them. Unbeknownst to the group, two paparazzi on motorcycles had followed their vehicle, trying to snap late-night photos for a tabloid feature. As one bike cut too close, their driver swerved sharply to avoid collision. The van fishtailed, slammed into the guardrail, and stopped just inches less than a meter from plunging into the Delaware River below. Inside, chaos erupted. Wilbert Hart was hurled forward, striking the dashboard and fracturing his collarbone. Blood from a forehead gash soaked his pristine stage suit, still glittering under the faint dashboard light. The group's driver, trembling, whispered that they had almost gone over. For minutes, the only sound inside the van was the rain. No one spoke. They knew how close they had come to vanishing, not just as musicians, but as men, brothers, and fathers. After the crash, the Delfonics canceled all remaining tour dates and imposed a strict new rule: no nighttime travel without police escort. For 6 months, they refused interviews, letting rumors swirl. When they finally returned to the stage, their tone had changed, the falsettos softer, the tempo slower, as though carrying the weight of near death. Their story remains one of survival by inches, a haunting reminder that behind every serenade of love and beauty, danger often rides in the dark, chasing the very stars it once adored. The Ohio Players. At the height of 1970s funk, Few groups embodied fire energy and sensuality quite like the Ohio Players. Known for their explosive stage presence and provocative album covers, they pushed boundaries with hits such as Fire Love Roller Coaster and Skin Tight. Hailing from Dayton, Ohio, they created a sound that fused horn-heavy funk with raw power music that was both fiercely rhythmic and unmistakably black. They lived their name fierce on stage, unstoppable in spirit. Yet one freezing night in the Midwest nearly extinguished their flame. It was the winter of 1974, and the band had just finished a sound check for a show near the Met Center in Minneapolis. Outside, a blizzard howled through the streets, dropping temperatures below zero. 3 members of the group entered an elevator bound for the dressing room, a simple ride that turned into a nightmare. Moments later, a sudden power outage caused by downed lines from the storm plunged the building into darkness. The elevator jerked to a halt between floors. Heating and ventilation systems cut out. Inside the metal box, the temperature dropped rapidly, the air thinning as time stretched. For 90 agonizing minutes, the musicians pounded the walls, shouting for help no one could hear. Staff assumed they had taken a back exit. As the minutes passed, oxygen dwindled, panic rising with the cold. When rescuers finally forced open the doors, saxophonist Clarence "Satch" Satchel had collapsed from oxygen loss and hypothermia. He was rushed to the hospital and placed in isolation for 3 days. The band canceled their performance, one of the few times they ever missed a show. For men who had made their living igniting audiences with heat and sound, the irony was cruel. Their greatest threat wasn't fire, but ice. After that night, the Ohio Players changed their touring habits. They refused to use old elevators in aging arenas and insisted on on-site generators during winter shows. To outsiders, it was just another eccentric demand. But for those who knew it was survival, a scar turned into precaution. And though fire would later blaze across airwaves, the band carried the memory of that cold trap with them, a silent testament that even for legends of heat and rhythm, darkness can fall when you least expect it. The main ingredient. In the soulful tapestry of early 1970s R&B, the main ingredient were masters of bittersweet truth. Their harmonies, smooth, sincere, and quietly powerful, carried songs that balanced joy and melancholy in perfect measure. With timeless hits like Everybody Plays the Fool, Just Don't Want to Be Lonely, and Spinning Around. I Must Be Falling in Love, they became one of New York's most beloved vocal groups. By 1973, they stood on the brink of crossover stardom, preparing for television appearances and national tours. But one stormy night would rewrite their destiny and dim their brightest opportunity. On November 22, 1973, after rehearsing at the Count Basie Theater in New Jersey, the trio Tony Sylvester, Cuba Gooding Sr., and Luther Simmons Jr. set off toward Newark in their brown Dodge van. Heavy rain blanketed Route 35 near Sayreville, the kind that turns headlights into hazy halos. Out of the darkness, a military truck suddenly veered into their lane without signaling. Their driver swerved, the tires lost grip, and the van tumbled into a roadside ditch, flipping once before landing upside down. The sound was violent metal glass and the muffled thud of instruments colliding in the back. Miraculously, all 3 survived. But Tony Sylvester, the group's sole anchor and lead vocalist, sustained a severe neck injury and nerve trauma that caused chronic pain and limited motion for months. Doctors warned he might never sing with full strength again. The truck's driver, an active-duty serviceman, faced no charges. The case was handled quietly through internal military channels, and no compensation was paid. As Tony recovered, the main ingredient were forced to cancel their November 25th performance at Radio City Music Hall, a show that would have launched a spring television special and cemented their mainstream success. They returned months later, but something in their music had changed. The smoothness was still there, yet the edges carried fatigue, the sound of men who knew how fragile momentum could be. Within the group, they called that night the rain that stole our leap. Still, they pressed on, creating new hits and inspiring generations of vocal trios. Their story remains a testament to quiet perseverance, even when fate takes the spotlight away the song and the soul behind it refuses to fade. The Emotions. In the golden age of 1970s soul, the Emotions embodied grace and feminine power. Hailing from Chicago, Illinois, the three Hutchinson sisters. Sheila, Wanda, and Jeanette brought a purity of harmony that soared between gospel reverence and disco joy. Their voices lifted spirits and hearts alike through timeless hits like Best of My Love, Don't Ask My Neighbors, and So I Can Love You. They were more than a vocal trio. They were a bridge between eras, blending the sincerity of Motown with the shimmer of the new dance age. But One Night in Louisiana would forever mark their journey with pain hidden beneath their perfect sound. On June 14, 1975, the Emotions were performing at the Baton Rouge Municipal Theater. The stage glowed under the weight of elaborate lighting rigs and golden drapes, a setup meant to make their ethereal white gowns gleam like starlight. During their opening number, So I Can Love You, a malfunctioning rig gave way. A 20-kilogram Fresnel stage light loosened by heat and vibration came crashing down from 4 meters above, striking Sheila Hutchinson on her right shoulder. The crowd gasped as her microphone clattered to the floor. Stagehands rushed in, the lights dimmed, and the theater fell silent. Doctors later confirmed that Sheila's shoulder bone had cracked clean through, yet with the group's summer tour prepaid and insured, she refused to cancel. For months, she performed in pain, her choreography rewritten so that her right arm barely lifted. Hidden beneath flowing silk sleeves were tight bandages and pain patches. Only after Jet magazine reported the story in 1976 did fans learn the truth that behind those flawless smiles, one sister was silently enduring agony each night. The incident changed the Emotions forever. They demanded their own certified stage engineer and banned makeshift light rigs from every future venue, a first for any female soul act at the time. Yet the show of strength was not rebellion, it was survival. The same voice that sang, "You've got the best of my love," had also carried the weight of suffering. And from that moment on, the Emotions stood not just for beauty and harmony, but for resilient women who turned pain into power and tragedy into timeless sound. The Pointer Sisters. In the vibrant swirl of 1970s funk and R&B, the Pointer Sisters stood out for their daring versatility. From jazz and gospel to rock and disco, they could do it all and do it with fire. Sisters Ruth, Anita Bonney, and June Pointer brought California sunshine to every stage, their harmonies bursting with both joy and defiance, with hits like Yes We Can I'm So Excited, Fire and Jump for My Love. They didn't just perform songs, they embodied liberation. By 1978, they were icons of empowerment women who had broken genre and gender barriers in an industry that rarely allowed either. But that same year, on a quiet Sunday morning, a flash of bad luck would leave scars that fame could never erase. On March 5, 1978, the sisters were traveling through Oakland, California on their way to perform at the Black Family Benefit Concert, a charity event supporting underprivileged children. Their car, driven by a hired chauffeur, cruised down East 14th Street, their conversation-light laughter filling the early air. Without warning, a fire truck from Station 18 responding to an emergency call made a sudden U-turn in front of them. The driver slammed the brakes, but it was too late. The vehicles collided, minor in sound, but catastrophic in consequence. Ruth Pointer, sitting unbelted in the front seat, struck the windshield head first. Blood streamed down her face as her sisters screamed for help. Paramedics rushed her to Highland Hospital, where doctors closed a deep laceration across her left cheek with 6 stitches. She was lucky to be alive, but the injury forced the group to cancel several key performances, including a scheduled Soul Train taping on March 10th, an appearance expected to cement their national television presence. Though her wound healed, Ruth carried a faint scar, one she often covered with makeup, though she later said she wore it as a reminder of grace. The accident transformed how the Pointer Sisters approached fame. From that day forward, they refused to travel without verified drivers or proper insurance and became outspoken advocates for performer safety on tour. To audiences, they remained dazzling, their energy as explosive as ever, but behind every harmony was a quiet wisdom earned through pain. The Pointer Sisters' legacy became not just about music that made the world dance, but about survival, sisterhood, and the unwavering will to keep singing no matter what tried to stop the song. From the soaring harmonies of the Bar-Kays to the timeless strength of the Pointer Sisters, these 21 bands remind us that greatness often walks beside grief. Their stories are not just tales of tragedy. They are proof of endurance, artistry, and faith. Behind every note was a fight, behind every stage light, a shadow. Yet their music still rises, carrying the soul of a generation that refused to be forgotten. In remembering them, we honor not loss, but legacy, the eternal rhythm of Black excellence that still beats on.